Hello and welcome to the Apex Shooter Development and Consulting channel. The purpose of this video is to address gear in a way that I have not seen yet before. Instead of focusing on only the products or a singular equipment setup, I want to equip you with the knowledge of mission parameters so that you understand the considerations that go into selecting equipment and gear. This will allow you the freedom of maneuver to configure something that is optimized for you. The overall goal of this video is passing as much of my knowledge that I have gained on this subject as I can. I also want this video to be able to be used as a template. It is also to showcase my knowledge of this so that you know you can speak with me on the subject and get good information. Lastly, I also intend to organize and timestamp this video in such a way that it can be referenced back to quickly and to be used as a teaching aid for other instructors. There are a number of reasons people cover gear. Lots of companies use social media to market their products, which is super cool and a way for us to see what is available. Others simply showcase equipment and gear for a comparison's sake to help people see what options there are and what you're getting compared to something else at what price range you're in. This video is by no means me trashing any content creator, or company that covers gear or equipment. This video is merely my rendition of what I believe to be more important. It is my hope that educating people on this topic helps to curb the useless dialogue I so regularly see across the industry about gear and equipment. I'm going to do my best to make this video palatable, but bear in mind I am a novice content creator and by extension therefore a novice editor. During this video, I am going to be speaking to everyone from armed professionals to prepared citizens to competitive shooters and many others. However, if you are a civilian, some of the things will not apply heavily to you. Adversely, I am going to be covering some specific things in a section just for civilians in the end that are specific decision-making factors or mission parameters that is for civilians that do not apply to the armed professionals. So for my civilians out there, stay tuned to the end for those specifics. I want you to keep in mind there will be some overlap when talking about these things the decision-making factors dictate is optimal. It is essentially a big math equation with lots of different possibilities, and they all play on one another. Furthermore, I understand that some things covered in this video will not be possible sometimes for my armed professionals out there because of having to work within your organization's budget and what they issue you. I know some organizations allow you to equip yourself in some regards, but nevertheless. For this video, and for the sake of staving off nuisance dialogue, I want you to pretend you have a say in selecting every single last piece of your equipment. Lastly, I would like to say I am very knowledgeable on the topic of gear and equipment and configuring it to optimize it for the task at hand, but I am not all-knowing. I don't know everything. Nobody does. Furthermore, I would encourage you to seek out as many teachings as you can. Just be mindful of who those teachings are coming from and what motives they have in speaking on the subject. Before we get started, I want to briefly discuss some vocab to assist your understanding. When I say gear, it is denoting nylons, such as packs, bags, chest rigs, plate carriers, belts, slings, pouches, and other things like this. The word equipment, as I will use it, is denoting things like kestrels, rangefinders, tripods, weapon accessories and attachments, weapons themselves, nods, ballistic computers, drones, and other items of a similar spirit. Lastly, I would like to ask if you could please hold comments until you have watched the entirety of the video. I understand the desire to weigh in, and I encourage you to do so after you watch the video's entirety. This is because of the sheer amount of depth I'm going into this. The things you may likely have to say are nearly certainly within the video already. Bear in mind, this is not geared towards one specific mission type, but rather the parameters and considerations for all missions. Some of this may be a duh moment for some. I encourage you to think of the people who may not have the perspectives that you have, and without further delay, let's crack into it. The environment is a description of the terrain, weather conditions, temperatures, biomes, and their specific types of fauna, and things such as this. There are numerous environments and biomes all around the planet, everything from snow-covered tundras to insanely hot, dry, sandy deserts to the open ocean. These numerous different environments have drastic effects on the gear and equipment you should have. Your uniform's environmental resistance is heavily messed with by the environment. Basically, the hot weather, breathability, or moisture-wicking properties, or its insulation properties, and other things like this for cold weather environments. Things even as simple as your socks may look drastically different. Gloves, ear coverings, footwear, etc., etc. The environment can affect what is optimal camo pattern of your uniform and weapons for your applicable environment. You may even just want to blend in by wearing nothing militaristic looking in some instances. In some instances, your weapon may not need to be painted because maybe your mission is, getting better with marksmanship principles. You don't need a painted up gun for that. Your weapon's lubricant can be affected in certain environments. Things such as freezing stable lubricants can become critical in extreme cold weather, and dry, dusty, hot climates, a good dry lube or adopting a different approach for applying wet lube may be necessary. Environments affect certain specialty equipment like snowshoes, desert goggles, emergency flotation devices for maritime environments, dive goggles, rappelling equipment. A couple of different examples of the specialty equipment there that your environment could affect. The environment has a big say on sustainment items, the level of your sleep system, luxury items such as jet boils, although those are kind of universal, but anyway. The way you store your water, as a brief example, more open top containers in cold weather environments may be applicable to break up ice when your water freezes. The type of food that you carry can look different. Different environments require different types of sustainment items, though many items are cross-compatible in numerous environments. Your attachments and idiosyncrasies of how you configure your weapon can be affected by the environment. The environment's frequent distances may manipulate your optic selection to some degree. Your battery-powered optics and other things may struggle in cold weather environments, so as a result, other optics may be more viable, or extra batteries may be necessary. Adversely, finding a way to keep moisture off your attachments and weapons internals in wet environments may become necessary, even if it's a change in the cleaning habits and intervals. Lastly, ways or products to keep heat off your weapon wires, as well as your hands in hot weather environments. Your weapon selection in general may be affected because of the environment. This is especially true for citizens in home defense settings or professionals performing niche roles. The ammunition as a result, therefore, is highly subjective as well. The region of the world that a particular biome may be in can also affect your weapon selection. As a result, the gear to accommodate all items is affected. Everything from bags, pouches, load-bearing equipment, belts, etc., etc. In closing, your environment has a drastic effect on the selection of your equipment as well as the way you need to configure your gear. I hope that I have painted a good picture and given insightful information on the effects your environment has on the gear. Manpower in this context has to do with the amount of people and their specific roles and assets they bring to the mission. Like with all parameters that have been listed and will be listed, it's not simply a standalone thing. The amount your gear is affected by manpower is heavily dependent on various other parameters. The more complex the mission, and the lower the manpower, the more stuff will look different. The longer the mission, with more or less people, it can look different, and so on and so forth. Manpower affects the quantity of items you're carrying that are essential to the mission accomplishment. It also affects the quantity of items you're carrying for sustainment while on mission. Team-specific gear such as communications equipment and more can be affected by environment. So as a result, bags, pouches, load-bearing equipment, all things necessary to carry all the gear is going to look different. Team identification paraphernalia is usually present when you have manpower. Things like dog tags, patches, and where they're placed, or other identifying items such as rolled up flags, helmet bands, tattoos, even team-specific SOPs for uniformity. Manpower affects the way you configure your gear and equipment. If you have a team and team type of equipment that's meant for others to access in an expedient manner, then the setup needs to reflect that. Things like back panels or how you place things on your plate carrier for team access. All things that can be affected by the setup of having a team. However, if your mission parameter requires less people, or perhaps with your other parameters, it may be more beneficial for you to adopt a higher level of self-sufficiency, being able to have more accessibility to certain things on your equipment instead of placing them out of reach of yourself. Then how you set something up needs to reflect that requirement. As you can see, the main thing the manpower affects is the items you're carrying from a mission accomplishment standpoint and the way you configure your load-bearing equipment. Whatever the mission is, it needs done, and some equipment that you may not have otherwise had to carry because it was someone else's team role, you are now needing to carry it. Think of it this way. The less people, the more roles you need to take on per the mission that needs accomplished. The more people, the less roles you take on, and therefore the necessary equipment can be spread out because there are more people to take on those roles. The gear appropriate to carry the equipment therefore changes as a result. Duration of mission is exactly what it sounds like, the amount of time you're going to spend to get the objective done. It could be hours, days, or even weeks. As with everything discussed here, it is not a standalone principle and heavily dependent on multiple other factors. Duration affects sustainment items such as shelter building equipment, food, water, inclement weather items such as cold and weather gear, extra shoes, clothes, weapons, parts, and cleaning and lubrication items, hygiene items, and toiletries. As the mission gets longer, the more sustainment you may likely need. Even if the sustainment is Gatorade, Monster Energy drinks, and Copenhagen for long callouts for TAC teams and law enforcement. Duration affects munitions quantity, which is also heavily based on another factor that we'll get into, but anyway. Since your mission's duration is mostly manipulating the number of items you're carrying, your pack selection and load-bearing equipment selection are affected as a result. Your duration of mission is affecting mainly your sustainment items, which in turn drives your selection of equipment necessary to accommodate the items. Similarly to manpower, it's mainly quantity of items, though it is different because manpower is affecting how many mission essential pieces of equipment you're needing to carry, while the mission's duration is mainly affecting how much sustainment is necessary to have. However, mission essential equipment may also be affected by duration as well. The things you need to carry for a 2-day op are completely different from the things you would need to carry for a month-long one. Team role in this context is the responsibilities that you are assigned and trusted with to give the team more assets and increase the team or element's overall capabilities. Team role affects the weapon systems you likely have and optimal accessories and attachments for them, munitions quantity, caliber, type, and design features of those weapons. Different roles may require you to have specific weapon systems. These weapon systems may be primaries or additions to your primary. Certain weapon systems may also be optimized by selecting specialty ammo for the Certain weapon systems may also be optimized by selecting specialty ammo for them to optimize the specific role and enhance the effects of that ammunition. Or the effects on target, anyway, I should say. The quantity of the munitions of this additional or primary weapon system may require more or less ammunition depending on the type of weapon it is. The type of ammo could even be explosive indirect fire types. This one has a heavy overlap with other parameters. Team role affects specialized equipment or items specific to your individual role to the team as well. As a few examples, communications equipment for key leaders, MG toolkits and items for gun teams, ghillie suits, ballistic CPUs, rangefinders, kestrels, and other such items for snipers and designated marksmen, FPV headsets and control modules for drone operators. The list goes on and on. If you have a role, your equipment must coincide with that role to allow you to perform it at a high level. As a result, your gear to accommodate these different items looks inherently different. The way you set up your weapons and equipment is also affected by your team role. The team role that you'll fill has one of the most drastic effects on your overall gear items, as well as the way you're configuring the gear and setting up your weapons. Each equipment configuration between people on a team is inherently different. This is because each member is responsible for a different role and provides a different asset to the team. Therefore, each member needs to configure or accommodate their different responsibilities through configuration of their gear. The context of vehicle usage here is in reference to the various types of vehicles used to travel and or for fighting or as an asset to the fight. Things such as aircraft, water vessels, trucks, and more. Vehicles can affect quantity of sustainment items. You may be able to get away with bringing more equipment as well as sustainment items if you have vehicles to do so. The reason you may be able, be more inclined to do so is because you do not need to carry it around and have a place to keep it. Just be mindful to have a plan and priorities when it comes to gear and equipment, because the vehicle you are using may become inoperable or the mission may evolve and require the vehicle to be staged and you to walk. So prioritizing and understanding the gear that you may want to have on body versus things you can still have but keep stowed in the vehicle is very important. Specialized equipment selections are affected by vehicle usage. Things such as rigging for tethering to aircraft, seatbelt cutters, wrist-bound compasses, oxygen masks, and other such things for halo jumps, headsets and communications equipment for vehicle crews. The list goes on. Some vehicles have optimal or required gear that is required to operate or be around them as well. Vehicles can affect gear configuration. For more permanent vehicle crews, it may be advantageous for you to adopt a more slimline setup, like not having things on your back or bulk to your sides that may affect the way you sit and lead to health concerns or your ability to bail out. For semi-permanent vehicle crews, operations where you're outside of the vehicle for a short time frame and then right back inside, such as LE personnel, it may be more advantageous to adopt a semi-slick setup so you maintain high mobility from that vehicle. And more upscaled equipment setups are stowed inside the vehicle, such as upscaled medical, armor, more munitions, and other equipment such as this, staged in your patrol vehicle. Vehicles affect weapon selection and configurations. Streamlined weapons that are easier to maneuver and deploy from a vehicle. Bear in mind, this is highly dependent on numerous other parameters. The biggest question you need to ask yourself when vehicles are a parameter in your mission is how much time you are spending operating out of that vehicle. Is it or is it not a key facet of the mission? You would be doing yourself a disservice to configure your whole loadout around a vehicle that you're only going to be in for 20 minutes. For this conversation, supporting elements means the logistics and supply chain, or lack thereof. It's not a conversation of aircraft, artillery, or other ground element support type of roles, mainly because that type of thing falls into the team role section better. as far as the equipment necessary for members of the team to have in order to use those types of support effectively. Quantity of food and water sustainment items is affected by logistics and support. If you have a regular logistics schedule that supplies your food, drops, and water, it wouldn't make a ton of sense to lug around a ton of sustainment items dedicated to food and water or its procurement. It also affects munitions quantity of the weapon systems you have. Same kind of theme with the self-sustainment items, but only it's ammo now. It wouldn't make a ton of sense to lug around an overzealous amount of ammunition when you have logistic resupplies. Just keep in mind, I'm going to reiterate this, these types of things are heavily dependent on many other parameters. Some of the parameters may add up to where this doesn't even factor in at all. Next is tools and items necessary to maintain the weapon systems and equipment. Logistics may affect this because if you have people that can swap your weapon out or fix it, it wouldn't make a ton of sense to carry a bunch of tools or parts to replace components outside of the usual good practices anyway, like keeping a spare bolt or two, or a firing pin, maybe a fix-it stick in your pack. Some supporting elements may also require specialty equipment to work with, like for example, with certain enemy capabilities and assets, you may have air power or ground combat elements working unilaterally with you. At night, it may be advantageous to use IR strobes or emitters somewhere on your uniform to increase positive identification percentage. Depending on what enemy you're dealing with, that is anyway. We'll get into that one later. This part, once again, is heavily dependent on numerous other mission parameters. When other parameters line up and you have good logistical support, it can ease a ton of needs with what you're having to carry. Keep in mind also that this parameter also has a big effect with how you're conducting yourself and treating your equipment. Without logistical support, losing items or breaking items or rapidly chewing through resources like ammo, food, and water is a much bigger deal. To the people out there that are getting ready to say, you can't rely on logistics even though you have it, you are right in some instances. And don't worry, the next parameter covers exactly that. This is a description of all the knowledge that you have gained through research or experience about all the things that can go wrong, break, or otherwise. These lessons learned have a drastic effect on your gear and equipment you take on the objective, set up weapons, and more. It can influence every single last facet of your equipment, everything from redundancies in your configuration of your weapon to what sustainment items you pack and how much of it. Even bringing wet weather gear to a mission that isn't scheduled to rain isn't scheduled to happen on, because the last time you heard it wasn't going to rain, it rained for the entire duration of the mission. Another brief example is the last time you went out, you didn't consider how you were going to eat your can of raviolis you packed. So you had to tip up the can to consume it, and you dumped it all over yourself and your equipment. So next time, you brought a little mini spork to ensure that didn't happen again. There's two key points of this parameter I want to cover. The first is this: don't prioritize failure over success. If all you do is configure your gear and equipment around the likelihood of failure, then it likely won't be configured to give you a better chance of success. Like if, when you're configuring your plate carrier, you're so focused on setting up your ripcord up to where it's super accessible because you're too focused on the failure of getting wounded, that you create a snag hazard, and now when you go to bail out of your vehicle, your plate carrier instantly falls off because the ripcord got snagged by something. You prioritized failure by making it more accessible rather than prioritizing success by setting it up in such a way that it is still accessible but not completely exposed. I'm sure you can think of other examples of some sort of setup that prioritizes failure and doesn't optimize it for success. The next key I want to cover is what is jokingly referred to as Black Hawk Down syndrome. It is bringing so much stuff that it bogs you down. Similar to prioritizing failure, but from more of a packing point of view. You must be able to prioritize what equipment you're bringing when you're considering contingencies. Is it important and most applicable to the task at hand? That's the question you need to ask yourself. You can't carry every last little thing. Situation and execution in this context are the events and levels of permissiveness that is happening in each scenario you're optimizing gear for, and the way the mission is best executed to achieve the desired result. There are multiple ways to execute various missions. Some people group this one into the environment parameter, but I believe it is better taught as its own parameter. Similarly to contingencies, this parameter also has a drastic effect on gear and equipment as a whole. It is basically understanding the different ways to accomplish the mission and which way is more optimal for the circumstances you are currently facing. Combined with other mission-specific parameters, this affects your gear and equipment. This parameter applies to all individuals but affects some more than others. I will try my best to paint a picture here as to what I mean. As an example, you have a civilian male in his late 30s with a solid understanding of his mission parameters. He stays up to date on his situational awareness and catches wind of a protest that will be taking place in an area that he has to travel through both to get to work, and to get home from work. There is no alternate route. The protests in his region have been known to become violent. Since he understands his mission parameters and therefore knows about situation and execution, as well as contingencies from experience, he knows the best way to get to and from work in a safe manner is to be slightly more prepared but still maintaining a low silhouette and not draw a bunch of attention to himself. Instead of selecting a big military-looking ruck, he selects a normal-looking backpack. Instead of selecting a full plate carrier and belt setup loaded down with comms capabilities, a full loadout of ammo and level 4 plates, fixed blade knife, and urban rappel rig set up on his back, he selects a nice small chest rig with an extra mag and some medical he can fit in his unassuming backpack. Instead of taking his Fight Light MCR setup, he chooses to take a small PDW for a little extra capability that can be easily stowed in the vehicle in a manner that isn't visible. Instead of his outside of the waistband level 3 holster on his belt, he selects his concealment option. The reason he has selected all the items is because he understands the situation doesn't call for all that bigger, more serious equipment. And the best way to execute his mission of providing for his family and maintain his personal security is to not draw attention to himself by wearing and having all that stuff. There are multiple examples that I can draw for this particular parameter. Essentially, it boils down to the fact that there are multiple different methods of execution to achieve the same goal. And there may be one or more ways that simply do not require the same gear and equipment as others. This is a loose example. Keeping up with the theme, you know by now that the parameters play heavily off of each other. This parameter, as well as contingencies and redundancies, are often the most misunderstood parameter that I see people get wrong when configuring and selecting gear and equipment quite frequently. Mostly because these two parameters, as well as the next one we'll discuss, require a level of experience and knowledge to understand what a situation calls for, different methods to achieve the goal, and what can go wrong with the mission or equipment that you have. In addition to this parameter being heavily subjective to other parameters, it is also heavily subjective to one's interpretation of appropriate, as well as the definition of success for whatever the goal is. I said in the beginning we were going to pretend that if you are an armed professional, you have a say in every facet of selecting your own equipment. This still remains true, but I wanted to still portray that I know that SOP from organizations has an effect on your items, and not always in a good way. Personal preference is somewhat like the two other parameters, the two being contingencies and redundancies and situation and execution, in that it is heavily rooted in an understanding that you have gained through experience or research about what is optimal for you specifically. This one, though, is more directed at gear or gear configurations that accomplish relatively the same goal, but just different methods of achieving it. This parameter is also directed at product brand names that you have grown to like. And lastly, it is directed at what you pack from a sustainment point of view. This parameter, comparatively speaking, is the least important one. It is also the one that you can only begin to let manipulate your gear and equipment when you have a thorough understanding of all the other mission parameters. Time and time again, I see individuals get this one blatantly wrong when they are selecting, configuring, or packing, and then when confronted about it, chalk it up to personal preference. And it is simply because they lack the knowledge about the other parameters and try to let their preferences get in the way of accomplishing the mission. Like, no, dude, you can't bring 4 MREs and 1 pair of socks for a 3-week-long operation. We have no logistical support on while we're out there because you prefer to pack light. You're just going to become a liability. Or, no, dude, you can't wear your Wolf Gray Cry pants and top with your Wolf Gray JPC 2.0 with your white-coated rifle. We're literally in the jungle. I can think of multitude of different examples like this. The first example I will use to illustrate proper usage of personal preference is in the configuration side of your equipment. You have a slick carrier that you put on separately, and then over top of it you wear a split rig or chest rig style setup. Then on the other hand, you have somebody that has a plate carrier that mollies their gear directly to it. Both methods have their own pros and cons, but they both accomplish nearly the same exact thing. Next example is brands. Most brands are highly subjective to a person's preference. Once you have determined a necessity for a piece of gear or equipment, from that point, who makes it is completely up to you. There are a few subfacets that play into someone's brand preference, like prior good experience with the product, price, features of one versus the other, and track record of durability or performance of the product. Lastly, we come to sustainment items packing. You can ask 4 different people and get 4 different answers about their sustainment loads. One person may want 3 meals a day for the duration of the op, a fresh pair of socks and undergarments for all the days, and need 3 logs of dip. whereas another person may pack 1 meal a day plus snacks, 2 changes of undergarments, and 1 log of Zens. One person may prefer a heavier coat for intermediate type of cold weather, and another may prefer a lighter layer. You get the point. In closing, for this parameter, personal preference can only begin to be considered once you understand what is required of the other parameters first, and once you have a good idea of what ways you prefer to do things, and be able to weigh the pros and cons for each piece of gear and equipment in your selected method. Don't let your preference get in the way of the mission being accomplished. Don't become a liability, like the example that I listed above. Be a competent, well-rounded asset to the team. I saved this one for last as a finale, because this one, out of all the parameters, has the singular most drastic effect on your gear and equipment as a whole. The enemy's capabilities define the very nature of your overall setup. The context of your enemy's capabilities here is your enemy's specific threat profile that they obtain through their own parameters and equipment. Every parameter that we have discussed up to this point that you plan for, your enemy also has. It is up to you to know what may likely be brought to bear against you, and how to best optimize your gear and equipment for that threat profile. Enemies affect weapon selections. Your enemy's equipment, posture, manpower, and capabilities have a drastic effect on the selection of your weapons. They have tanks? Okay, we need rocket launchers. They have heavy numbers? Okay, we need automatic belt-fed weapons to enhance our suppression capabilities, and so on and so forth. Ammunition selected is affected by your enemy. Some enemies and their equipment may require a specific type of projectile or caliber to best deal with them. Things like slap rounds, AP rounds, tracers to more adequately spot impact zones of machine guns, bonded ammunition for mass retention of the projectile through glass for enemies using vehicles more often, and many other examples of ammunitions. Your enemies also heavily determine the appropriate quantity of ammunition that is appropriate. Your enemy may be a coyote on a farm that you need to deal with. Therefore, your ammunition reflects it. I think you get the point. They can affect your defensive equipment. I'm directing this particular thing at your level of protection afforded to you by your armor and the features your armor has. The more you wear something, the more comfortable and lightweight you'll want it to be for the protection it affords, though this is kind of directed more at duration. However, the level of protection your armor affords is directly tied to the weapons and ammunition being brought to bear against you. The frequency the weapons are being used against you is a big factor in selecting armor. As an example, law enforcement personnel typically wear soft, pistol, and knife-rated armor, whereas organizations that encounter more capable weapons more frequently often opt for armor plates instead of soft armor. Your enemy's level of training and their specialized equipment determine the level of signature mitigation that is required visually, auditorily, signs of life-wise, and even in the electronic spectrum. This influences your overall setup. Rifle painting, weapon texturing, metal-to-metal auditory signature mitigation, flash reduction, covering things up that light up and that may shine in the MV spectrum, pack coverings, face painting, aerial signature mitigation, IR masking methods and materials, the list goes on and on. The more competency your enemies have, or the more technologically advanced the force, or the more emphasis placed on mitigation of detection per the mission, the more you have to consider the signature that you are emitting. This includes the color scheming of your uniform as well. Not its environmental properties that we covered in the environment section. I'm more referring to the camo patterning for the biome that you're in. Specialty equipment can be affected. Some enemies may have specific equipment that is best countered with different types of equipment of your own. For example, drone countermeasures such as shotguns, jammers, and examples of entrance or position coverings to deny drone access. Other examples include radio signal scrambling equipment, dagger systems to increase battlefield awareness, and many more examples of specialty equipment. All the things listed above have a drastic effect on the equipment, from the types of packs and LBE load-bearing equipment you select, to the overall configuration of your weapons and attachments, to different pouches and various other features your equipment may need to have. In closing, when it comes to your enemy and their capabilities, your equipment is shaped drastically by them. Some enemies may require much more upscaled equipment, while others may not. It is not appropriate to be hosing down a townhouse building with a single barricaded individual inside with a belt-fed weapon and tracers, just like it isn't appropriate to be bringing only a pistol to a trench raid. There are many other examples I can include here. This parameter is one of the most paramount ones to understand. Scaling yourself appropriately for it can save you lots of wasted money and give you the edge you need to overmatch your opponent. Now we are going to move on to what I talked about earlier, the section specific to civilians. The parameters up to this point are important for prepared citizens to understand, so don't think this wasn't for you, but the ones in the sections to follow are super specific to the prepared civilian space and have big effects on your equipment also. The big thing I want to touch on before moving to these specific parameters is that this is much harder from a civilian standpoint to configure your gear and equipment than it is for an armed professional. An armed professional's mission parameters, textually speaking, are clearer cut than a citizen in some regards. Sure, you have some super clear parameters, such as someone who just wants to protect themselves and their property, but if you're someone who is trying to prepare for more scenarios, it can get hairy fast. This is because at the end of the day, you don't truly know the direction your gear or equipment needs to go. That can turn into a big money pit fast. The words of wisdom I can offer you in this regard is to sit down with yourself or other like-minded individuals and do a threat analysis. This can help answer lots of questions you may have about the equipment and gear that is necessary. Without further delay, let's crack into it. Up first, we have laws of the land. Agree or disagree with them, they drastically shape the types of things you can own and what the shops and the local shops will have available to you. Some places have weapon attachment restrictions, bans on capacities, bans on suppressors, and more. The name of the game in these specific places where things like this are present is to take your parameters and see what would be optimal, and then do the best that you possibly can do. The spirit of this is doing whatever you can to get around, or optimize for the, parameters that you would have in certain areas such as this. I apologize, I don't have a better answer for you at this time. This refers to two different sides of the coin here, and neither are incorrect. You have the people who place a high level of importance on what capabilities they can bring to bear. Then you have the people who simply just want more peace of mind and are satisfied with less equipment. I see it frequently. People say to one another that if you don't have such and such, you're dead. Or the other side of that says such and such is a waste of money and time. Look, it's perfectly okay to scale yourself for more dangerous situations, just like it's perfectly okay to simply have a handgun and some light medical supplies. However, don't kid yourself into thinking that you're going to last against forces with more numerical advantages and better weapons. Just as well for the upscaling people, don't kid yourself either by thinking all your equipment can replace competency and hard skill. The lithosphere area here is bridged by cost. You have some people who want more capabilities but don't place a super high level of importance on it and must operate inside of a tighter budget. But it is important to them nonetheless. This is where cost-minded versus reputation-minded people come into play, the two different types of people there. Some people are perfectly fine spending $60 on those super high-speed, highly strategic, Kydex mag pouches, whereas other people may opt for the Condor ones. Neither one of these people is wrong, and both people now have a way to stow their magazines on their body. However, there are some things that you need to be very wary of when it comes to cheapness. Don't go buy things that will cause you to be a liability. This one is similar in that it involves somewhat of a mindset thing. It is a known fact that equipment means nothing if you're not going to understand it and know how to properly use it. This may influence your purchasing decision. If you don't have the time to dedicate yourself to learning how to use a certain piece of gear or equipment, it is truly a waste of money. Be honest and ask yourself, am I going to dedicate the appropriate time to learn this piece of kit? And can I allocate the appropriate amount of funds it may require to adequately employ this capability frequently to get better with it? If the answers are no, perhaps save more or redivert the time you spend on other things. Legal ramifications are the consequences that may be brought against you should you use your equipment or gear. You may need to have what is it going to look like in a courtroom on your mind when you select different items. This can have effects on some of the things you may want to have. I understand the desire to upscale yourself for bigger threats, and you still can. Just understand what's more appropriate day to day, and what point does returning to your vehicle to grab that sweet 300 black set out turn from self-defense to felony. Just food for thought. There are lots of things to consider when it comes to your overall kit. I don't mean it to be overcomplicated, and in my opinion, this is not overcomplicated at all. It is the perfect amount of complexity. Get this process wrong, and it can mean the mission doesn't get accomplished adequately, or even at all. Some may be asking themselves, well, how do I know the equipment I need for my specific parameters? And that is going to boil down to the amount of time or experience you gather through time and hard work, as well as the amount of time you put into diving into different nuanced types of missions and heeding the wisdom of others. Though, be careful about who it's coming from, especially when you're new to this stuff. You eventually will develop a filter and begin to understand the differences between others and their missions and yours, and what to take away from someone's teachings. A key thing to remember is in some instances, gear and equipment can be replaced simply by being a well-rounded, practiced individual. The more you know, the more items you can get away with not having in some instances. Gear refinement is a continuous process. You should always be looking for a better way to scale yourself or enhance your capabilities, if it's something important to you or if it's your job to be capable. Even if it's moving a mag pouch 2 inches to the left on your belt. If it's making you faster, then it's a win. Always be looking for little changes like that can make you more effective. Don't let this turn into busy gear syndrome, though. Busy gear syndrome is when you are constantly changing your equipment and gear at an unnecessary rate and very drastically. This can affect your ability to perform appropriate muscle memory, or even leads to you forgetting what items you have in what pocket or pouch on rucks, bags, or even on your body. Lastly, don't fall into the consumerism trap. Many say this while talking about and promoting various brand names of items. I hope you have mentally annotated in this video, though gear is shown in the B-roll, it is not talked about or promoted. Bringing competent information back to this space and staving off consumerism is a high priority of this company. Remember, gear is no substitute for competency. Have the day you deserve.